it's interesting that China, the entrepreneurial culture is so fixated on IPOs versus acquisitions. I mean, China is the only country in the United States that has plenty of big billion-dollar internet companies that have huge audiences. Those companies have tons of cash, but they don't really do acquisitions, and a lot of the startups don't really want acquisitions. And you haven't seen much acquisition activity between Beijing and Shenzhen and Shanghai and Hong Kong and Silicon Valley. Do you think all of that's going to change going forward? Do you think this is an evolution thing, or culturally, is there just so much opportunity in the Chinese market? Why not go big?
I actually think it will over time probably people start to do more and more acquisitions. But culturally, still there are in this market because of the growth, because the opportunities, and because labor is still relatively cheap. So many of these companies feel that they can build it cheaply internally, and they can have better control. But I mean, as market become more mature, as the China's labor cost goes up, I think people are going to be more willing to use sort of the capital markets ability to acquire companies to expand themselves. So I think it's an overall market maturity issue, and it's also the current market situation. So it's not quite what it used to be. It used to be no one would acquire companies, but now you start to see some smaller acquisitions, not big acquisitions. And it's also, for me, you know, I worked at Goldman Sachs for close to 8 years, and I see a lot of M&As, and to properly integrate a target into your company, that takes a lot of management maturity, takes a lot of work. And so I actually think start with small is the right way to do. I mean, Vance has done a dozen acquisitions, and they are all small acquisitions since we went public.
Yeah, that's interesting. The last time I was in China, or actually I think it was the next to last time I've been in China, I've been there a bunch in the last year, I was talking to Tencent's management, and they were talking about, you know, they have this huge market cap they could do a lot with, and that, you know, ultimately it's this concern of really diluting their culture. They have a very, very specific culture, and, you know, they're surging now, and it's kind of bringing in this foreign organism is a little bit threatening to them, which, you know, I think sometimes people learn the hard way in Silicon Valley. It's interesting that there's that concern on the front end among Chinese entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, Tencent has done you know, some smaller acquisitions in Martin and Jack Ma, not Jack, Pony Ma, Ma Huateng and Martin are very smart management team talents, and they're very, very good with what they're doing. And so it's right for Chinese companies to be very concerned about culture whether you can properly integrate a different culture. And so I would say M&A now in China is probably still not a big not a mainstream way where people would actually use to expand. It's probably organic growth is still sort of the driver for expansion of companies. Right. But I think as market matures, I will see more. I expect to see more M&As.
Let me just, before we wrap up here, ask you about the impact of these IPOs and a lot of this, you know, hype and frothiness in the Chinese internet. With companies that you're funding now, are companies having a harder time finding recruiting talent? Are they having an easier time because everyone sees their stock might be worth something? Are valuations in Chinese internet companies soaring out of control? And is that causing challenges for VCs like you?
Talents in Chinese market is always the most scarce resources for any company, any VCs. It's a market where it's growing very fast, and fundamentally, people are the ones that are going to make a company successful or not successful. So fighting for talents is definitely becoming more intense with more companies going public. Hence, building a really good culture, particularly with public companies, building a really good culture to retain your people, even when they are very wealthy, it's very important. I would use one of our portfolio company that my partner, David Chow, is still on the board, 5-1 job. The management team has done a great job retaining their mid-level and above people. Vance Info, another one of my portfolio company, since they went public, they have like over 100 millionaires in the company, and it's wonderful to see. But so far we have absolutely only one mid-level like executives
Wow.
that the IPO and left the company, and so they have done a great job in keeping their talents together. And I think that's because they are very vigorously focused on keeping a culture that is still down to earth, despite the fact that you have a lot of money now. I mean, and one of the ways to inspire executives to stay in your company is you still have a long way to go. Chinese market, despite the recent inflation, in the long term, I think growing at 7 to 8% for the overall economy is still a very good growth to have. And the company, if you are the sector leader, you can grow your company to be much bigger. Right now, the market cap seems big, but it can get bigger. I mean, if you compare it to a lot of the global companies that in this, sector leaders in different, 500 Job is the leader in job space, and you compare to Monster, the market cap, and you feel like there's still room to go.
That should be China's slogan, is that there's everything can get bigger.
Well, but I want to put some sanity into this. It is overall I feel that China is still going, but it is very important to realize that the flight to quality for investors will become more intense as the overall investment market, in terms of global investment market, in terms of understanding China, becomes more mature in understanding all these Chinese companies coming out, and they would begin to differentiate. So that the management team that can continue to execute quarter after quarter versus the management team that will not be able to execute. And I hope to sort of see this flight to quality become more obvious over the next few years.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ruby, for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.